Welcome to the InnerVerse. It's an illusion.
Welcome to the One Within All. It's the InnerVerse podcast. You know what it is. I'm your host, Chance. And today I've got not one, but two Florida mans here to not actually talk about Florida. Maybe there's some Florida in here, but we're going to be discussing something that has, of course, been a really popular topic in the sort of conspiracy sphere of recent years. A lot of stuff getting pegged to what is called Tartaria. And on, I wouldn't blanket statement, things like that. But I'm really excited to be discussing one of the probably best guarded secrets of the ancient world and in current world, which is the magic in the music, the frozen music, if you will, that is known as architecture. So we got Juan, the homuncologist, totally crushing over at the One-on-One podcast, making like weird movies and comic books and all kinds of stuff that isn't even a podcast. It's so cool. Yeah, kind of jealous of all this amazing media empire that he's building over there. He's got a lot of books.
Oh, got to plug the zine. Plug the zine.
Okay, yeah, he's got the magazine Occultus Mundi. We'll have to find out more about what that is.
We'll talk about that later.
All right, well, so we'll get to that. And then, my boy, homie Romie from the Rising from the Ashes podcast. Musician, producer, farmer, alchemist, all around fun dude. We are going to have a blast talking about, both of these guys are coming at this subject from slightly different angles. So if we were to maybe put a nutshell on it, this is a conversation about Pythagorean palaces and resonance architecture, possible etheric technology, the magic of mirroring the fractal of the microcosm that is our body, the macrocosm that is in the universe, in the layout and design of sacred sites and buildings and Masonic masterpieces. And I'm pretty fascinated by the whole subject because it came to my realization recently from my buddy Dylan's work that even the word palace is actually a word referring to wisdom, because you have Pallas Athena and phonetically it's the same thing. And there's a lot more gravy to dive into with that particular word, but we have a lot on the table. These guys put together slides and they're going to be competing for the mic a lot here, I'm pretty sure, because they have a lot to say on this subject. So sit back, enjoy the ride, put your diapers on. Roman said you might need them. And welcome, my guys. What's up? Welcome back to the show.
Yo. And me and Romie have talked already, so we're kind of on the same wavelength. But the thing with this subject is that it's the same subject, but you can approach it from so many different angles. And that's what's beautiful about it, because you can literally go anywhere with it. If you want to get woo woo, it can get woo woo. If you want to be more scholarly, how we interviewed a scholar, an architect, on the architect as magician. It is an actual thing. You can take it from a scholarly point of view, or you can go full blown woo woo and go off the deep end with it, which I think I might do today. Who knows? But it's going to be fun. But we've already talked, so we're not going to be too crazy.
Oh, I think we're going to be a little crazy, but in a fun way. Yeah, there's a saying that like all masons are priests. Not all priests were masons, but all masons were priests in the ancient world, because you needed that initiatory knowledge to be running those giant construction projects and building those cathedrals, which are technology that is currently not available. And I guess probably at no point was it ever available to the common man to comprehend how it was done. I mean, when you look at some of these so-called Gothic cathedrals, which is sort of an insult in and of itself, calling something Gothic back during the Roman times was like calling it barbarian. Yet at the same time, those guys were ballsy as hell. Like the way that they would build the stonework, it just seemed like you wouldn't even know how it would work or like how it would be safe.
Yeah, you touch it and it might fall. Right.
Yeah. Just these
you're really onto
things.
something with the Masons being priest, that kind of aspect, because, and I have some slides on it a little bit later, but, getting downloads, like where are they getting these angles, these dimensions, these dreams, these papers, these thoughts, these schematics to come up with these outstanding, groundbreaking, mind unveiling pieces of architecture that would lay and break the cornerstone of people's imaginations, and then basically create a rift in space-time of sorts. It's almost as if you needed to have some sort of shamanic training to become an architect, like you're saying there. And so, yeah, I think there's something definitely to that, sir.
Absolutely. And John Dee was a proponent for that. He said that any architect needed to be skilled in all the sciences, and the trivium or quadrivium, whatever it was, they needed to understand it because it is the most sacred art that there is. These buildings are algorithms incarnated. And I don't know if maybe Romie wants me to do my introduction, which he's already heard, and we can start from there and then get into the breakdown of these homunculi, because that's what they are. These cathedrals are homunculus, and these architects were the demiurges to them. So I don't know if you want me to start with my introduction and where this got me started into it. So I did a presentation with Emily Moyer not too long ago, a couple weeks ago, and the presentation there was named Math Magicians, Number Forms, and Archetypture Imaginalis, which is a term that I coined from mundus, imaginalis, this weird concept that we can get into towards the second hour, because it gets deep, and I'm referencing this super occult book that isn't even available online. I literally had to buy it, and when I got it, it had all this writing in it and diagrams, and it's because the person that had it before me was studying this material, and it's got to do with this exact thing with the imaginary architecture. It's the craziest thing. I came across the Pythagorean palace idea on the mirrors episode that I was doing research for homie Romie. We were talking about the mirroring of realities, and I was doing some research on the optics, catroptics, which is something that John Dee was into, where they understood that they could use their soul as a mirror to capture what Paracelsus called the astra, this essence in everything. Everything is magical. And Al-Kindi, which inspired John Dee, said that everything is light and everything is emanating light. And I believe that the people who can control that light. So my light interacts with Chance's light, vice versa, and it creates an alchemical reaction when our lights meet. This microphone is putting out a light. That tree outside is putting out a light. It's interacting with me. And the people who could manipulate that light are the magicians. Those are the people who could use nature, right? Magia naturalis, using nature without, because theurgy is using higher beings to interact in the world. No, using nature to cause change. That's natural magic. And this is what these guys were doing back then. So John Dee understood that you could use the soul to reflect this light and charge things. So essentially these buildings that we're going to be talking about are talismans, and they were charged in some sort of way to, what I believe, warp people's perceptions. I want to start off with the idea, the Platonic Solids, right? We've all heard of the Platonic Solids, but there's an obsession with the ancients, for whatever reason, to take incorporeal concepts and bring them to manifestation. That's magic. So when you have this idea in the ether, you know, it goes from the ether to your mind, verbal expression. So you talk about it, you transfer it to some sort of medium. So paper or a grid, or you make a model out of it, and then you give birth to the actual model itself. That's why a lot of these architects of back then would use models. They only built things using models, and that's the micro with the macro. So they understood if they can manipulate and understand this model in the small sense, right, in the Renaissance time with the macro and the macro and the micro, that they could build it. And I'll bring up some pictures of some cathedrals that they literally threw out the models and they had to go digging for them afterwards and put them all together to finish the building because they didn't understand how the guy was doing it. But these architects would build these little models, and those were their saints. That was God to them because it was perfection to them. They were following strict guidelines. Now, this idea of, I'm going to quote the book that I'm going to talk about in the second half, like all architectural forms created by the mind and sound, whether physical or psychic, they are founded on the Platonic solids. And this goes back to Plato, Archimedes, all these guys. They wanted ideas to transcend different levels of reality, right? And it all starts with the cube. For some reason, they were obsessed with the cube. The Pythagoreans looked at it as a god. There are a lot of Renaissance era architects that said that they would refer to God in cubic solidity, right? Like the God in his cubic solidity, they would call him a cube, right? The procreator of number. So it starts with that. And the Pythagoreans, who were essentially number magicians, numbers were not only quantities, but qualities as well. They had fixed or predictable geometric, psychological, moral, and even personal natures. And this is George Hersey. The distribution of elements in a building, such as columns, doors, and windows, and their proportional relationships were infused with meaning that we cannot recapture until we examine the mathematical context within which the buildings were designed. So this idea that Pythagoras said all is number, the way I interpret that is all is number, hinting at binary code, hinting at some sort of simulation, hinting at there can be glitches or there can be viruses within the simulation or whatever, et cetera, et cetera. I think that the use of, because mathematics is the language of the universe, right? The use of mathematical formula, I think that's some sort of magic, because in school they always taught us, hey, plug this incorporeal concept into this formula, the Pythagorean theorem or the Thales theorem, whatever, and you're going to get X or Y or Z. But they never told us what these numbers or number forms mean. And I find it interesting that in the Matrix, right, it's the number code and the characters plug themselves into the Matrix, right? How we would plug things into these theorems or formulas or whatever it is to come up with these concepts that we didn't even understand. And they would always be like, hey, what are we going to use this for in real life? Well, you're probably never going to use calculus in your real life, but it's all about challenging your brain and all this stuff. Well, I think that mathematics, the ancients, they understood that if they could somehow encapsulate that macro into the micro, being these buildings, and it doesn't stop with buildings. The reason that a dice is shaped like a dice, not because it works well, but because it imprints itself the best in your mind, that shape. So that makes sense that the dice is behind a lot of people's mishaps, a lot of people's gambling addictions, right? Because it gets
let me throw a few things down on this one. The first about the dice, another way of pronouncing dice would be dice. And dice is one of the names for the god. No, dice is literally one of the names for God of the ancient world. You can go back in the catalog of InnerVerse episodes. Actually, there's a Vibrant, and L.C. King did this huge presentation on how you can basically derive everything in the cosmos out of the cube, including all forms of sacred geometry. It was really good. Marty Leeds has got some awesome stuff on dice in particular. But I want to point out what chestahedron,
right?
So when you're talking about number, and a matrix of sorts. Language itself is a bit of a matrix. I think that is what is the matrix, not nature itself or the physical reality, because we have become these creatures that now interface with our world through language. And like Baudrillard talked about, the simulation, his idea of the simulation was hyperreality. And as I understand and interpret it, he's referring to how through language, we create a story of what we think reality is. And the news is a perfect example of that. People that believe the news. And then when simulacra and simulation. And then when nature, when the physical reality, when your experience does not align with this conceptual universe that you've created in your mind through story, through language, then reality feels unreal. And that's my understanding of hyperreality. But so this number thing, whatever it was, whatever the priesthood was that created these types of buildings throughout the world, seeded these concepts, these mythologies that are all so syncretizable and so similar that it appears as if they came from a single civilization. Mm-hmm. They did this originally, I think, as seafarers who were traveling from place to place, holding on to secrets of not just architecture, not just the occult, but also of and shipbuilding, of course, too. And they were using trade. Basically, they had a trade language. And what I mean by that is all the languages and dialects of regions where they went were able to understand these traveling adventurer priests, if you will, pirates, pirates, the ones with fire, because the words themselves broke down into number. And thus, if you understood how that number system worked, and you were initiated enough into this numerical code of language, then you could understand dialects, stories, and do trade anywhere that you went, because the language words themselves become akin to sheet music, in the sense that, like, you know, people from different civilizations across time can read each other's sheet music. That doesn't change. You know, that system is consistent from people that speak different languages all around the world. So the architecture side of this being called frozen music, because it's incorporating these divine principles and this divine number, the ideas that are there are translatable across time and space and culture and language in a universality of sorts.
And to add on John Baudrillard, the hyper reality, the way I understand it is, for example, this podcast is a hyper reality. It's a reflection of what we as podcasters perceive to be our reality, because we talk different. So we talk different when we're on a podcast. As soon as you hit that record, we act differently. We portray a different augmented reality. That's the hyper reality he was talking about, when the map becomes the empire. You know what I mean? So that's the way I understand it, where reality is a simulation of something else. So for example, right, the typical Disney princess isn't based off a real princess. It's based off of whatever hyper augmented reality they've made the princess to be, that we've accepted culturally. Right. So it's like, draw me a princess and you're going to draw Cinderella. Well, that's not what a princess looked like back then. That's what we've been portrayed from a simulation of a simulation to understand and accept it as reality. And it gets really convoluted because it's got to do with postmodernism and all this shit. But that's the way I understand it, where it's like a simulation of the real thing, but just augmented, you know, one step above. It's like when we're the reality TV show, those people wouldn't act that way if the cameras weren't there. They're living a hyper reality. It's an augmented reality. We act different. If we weren't right now recording this episode, we would act differently. We wouldn't be talking. And you know what I mean? Not like we're being fake, but the way that we explain things or go about, you know, how we change our demeanor by being on this like this podcast is affecting our reality right now because we're acting different by being on here
to a degree. And I think it's also this flow state that we hit that makes it different than because of that resonating of light between us. Simulation's a funny word because before it got started, you know, being used in computer language and to describe a false reality, the word really just meant hypocrisy or assuming a false character, a deceitful character, feigning to be that which you are not. And in a very interesting way, the priesthoods of the old world and, the cult that still continues today, the cult of the middlemen and pirates, they have found a way to simulate nature through the abstraction of number, encoding that into their myth, encoding and Skyclock too, encoding that into myth, encoding that into architecture, and in everything all the time. You can just do gematria breakdowns of news stories and stuff, and it's in there. So I think that's part of what pulls people into the realm of belief of fiction, is because the spellcasters have gotten so good at simulating nature on an abstract level in a way that's hitting us in the ideal and making us think it's real. But I want to kick it over to Romie, because we've been going like 20 minutes and Romie needs to get in here.
Well, one thing I wanted just to mention, riffing off of the princess thing I thought was funny, is you look at some of these dresses and it almost looks like they're designed to be bells. Like these women are bells. Like they have that really skinny top with that bushel on the bottom, and it's the bell at the ball, and you're just like, whoa, weird, pushing that on Disney movies.
Who's Bell?
Yeah,
Bell
right.
is the sun. It's one of the names of the sun god is Baal, Bell, Bull.
Yeah, that's that bull worship. Or, you got, so the word play is really interesting. You got palace, the phallus, you have angles, angels, and the dimensions, and within dimensions, or that altering time space void.
Elevations too.
And arche, like architecture, arche, one of the names for Maya, or like the titles for Maya, mother of Hermes, but also the same name for the mother of Buddha, proving that they're the same, Mercury and Buddha.
Yeah.
And Maya also sounds a lot like Mary. Adonis's mother was Mira. So it's the same archetype. And one of the epithets for Maya was Maya Arche, or Arche. So it's kind of like Pallas Athena. But then that word arch, it's the arch. It's a powerful structure. It's also thus the dome above us, and rulers, or a ship or a boat. So or you can even get to a bow, like to fire arrows with. There's all these different things that the arche, arch is encoding too.
And so brings up an important point, that when you start to look at these ancient, antiquated architecture and their purpose and function, now that's really important to why they were built, where they were built, how they were built, and who built them. And those importance of them being built together in a symbiotic type of way. So a masculine type of building and a feminine type of building, holding those archetypes through and through as the temple of the body and the body of the temple, and that cohesion together, because they were built, as Juan was emulating towards earlier, as a homunculus, as a baby, as a living being. So you are going to have that yin and that yang. You're going to have both of those buildings. You're going to have buildings that are going to have a lot of spires, and they're going to have more things protruding out of them. Then you're going to have these flowy, beautiful buildings that look like a bell, that look like a woman wearing a dress, that look like could be potentially a womb. This something that you want to cradle yourself into to create comfort and warmth as a mother. So these different buildings that have these qualities, that have archetypal qualities tied to them, as well as these celestial qualities, if you will, just to harness in the godlike divine energies and the vibrations. That's important. You nailed it,
too, because when I brought up Maya Arche, I wanted it to sound like we are saying that these buildings, which are palaces of sorts, and sometimes literally called a palace, Pallas Athena, Pallas Minerva, wisdom, they are a sort of womb, in the sense that you're meant to you're like creating a home for the god to live within in stone. Yeah. And there's very much a womb aspect to that.
Absolutely.
It's alchemy. And to add on to what I've been saying, so the Cartesian coordinate system, which Rene Descartes was obviously the one that talked about mind-body dualism. He came up with the Cartesian coordinate system. And I remember reading a book and by the way, he inspired Leibniz, the guy who made binary code. And the guy who made binary code would talk about how your ideas and your thoughts can manipulate reality. So the law of attraction and all these things. So René Descartes inspired him, and allegedly he had this secret journal that Leibniz went after he had died to copy down and break this crazy cipher that René Descartes had. But he made the Cartesian coordinate system, and I remember reading somewhere that it came to him in a series of dreams. But then when I went to go do some research that I was doing and confirm that, they said that he was laying in bed and saw a fly on his ceiling, and he wanted to have a grid of how to find the fly. I'm like, oh, okay, whatever. So that's the mainstream narrative. But the Cartesian coordinate system served as the bridge between Euclidean geometry and algebra. And when I was doing because I'm getting into etymology now because I see how crazy it is. I found out that algebra in the 15th and 16th century meant bone setting, which I found interesting. Have you ever heard of that, Chance? Well, because I know you're into etymology. Algebra meant bone setting, putting together of broken parts, which I was like, bone setting. What an interesting thing to say. For
the body of the mathematical problem.
I don't know, but it meant bone setting in the 15th and 16th century. So it served as this bridge, right, between the incorporeal, these ideas, and then you were able to plot them down on this paper and grid, and able to come up with you when you add that access. And my background, I do CAD CAM, computer assisted design and computer assisted manufacturing. So I've programmed robots to make parts. So I've worked with this grid, the Cartesian coordinate system, which is found in everything nowadays. It's found in analytical geometry, and any 3D designing program that you've used has this system in it. I believe it to be some sort of mandala, or almost like a talisman of some sorts. Mm-hmm. Or I had it in my notes where I compared it to a Freemasonic tracing board, right? Because it's all about you're supposed to meditate to be able to ascend to this other realm of things. Well, I believe that with mathematics, you're able to do the same thing. If you're able to put together the right number, it's alchemy. If you're able to put together the right numbers and all these things, something magical will happen. That's why the Pythagoreans worship number. It wasn't just a qualitative thing to them. These numbers were actual living entities. Mm-hmm. And they took that and they infused it, right? In the Renaissance, they infused this into the architecture. And they said, if this can do this to the psyche, well, if a sympathetic magician, the law of contagion, can affect people from afar, well, then we can do the same thing with these buildings. So the law of contagion is if something that has been in contact will continue to be in contact for X amount of time. So once you enter this space, I'll use an example, the Great Pyramid of Giza. I've had friends of mine, I'm planning a trip next year. I've had friends of mine go into the pyramid, and they say that the energy is different. They say it's working at 0.05% of what it used to do. But when you enter a different state of consciousness. And I've always wondered how certain researchers are able to come by. There's always, I think I go hard in the paint, but then there's always some other researcher who goes harder in the paint. Well, I come to find out doing some reading recently that some people quite literally are having some, what I call ultra-terrestrial knowledge presented to them. They're having otherworldly entities, or they're able to tap into these higher dimensions within these buildings somewhere, right? In a secret society or wherever it may be, to where they're able to unlock some other sort of knowledge, right? They're able to call down on fucking Cthulhu or somebody to
not Cthulhu
to talk. Who knows?
Don't call Cthulhu. So I think there's a possibility with that. What you're describing, the piezoelectric effect and the type of materials building these structures, especially like the Great Pyramids, that
very, very much
all that weight of all that stone being crushed, creating this piezoelectric field, which is like a plasma generating device. Well, the research that we got into with Dr. Greg Little a few months back is very convincing along the lines that plasma itself is a conscious being, a conscious entity once
have you heard
created and manifested in the world.
Vincent Bridges? Have you heard of Vincent Bridges before?
I don't think so.
So look up Vincent Bridges when you have a chance. He talks about the angels.
Next level. This
Next
level.
He passed away, but he's next level. Yeah. And what's the other one?
Wrote the follow-up to he wrote the follow-up to Mystery of the Cathedrals.
What's the Dan Winter, right? Is the other guy? So these guys, they talk about plasma being angels and how you're able to interact with these beings, right? And they call it, I forgot what they have the book here. They call it the Ophanics, the Ophium, right? I think it's how they say it. But how
basically
you're saying
another way of saying seraphim, because the word Ophium is referring to serpents.
Yeah. So this idea that you're saying where this plasmic being is conscious. Well, they've talked about how they were able to summon these things and use these beings. They were occultists, use these beings for whatever thing that they were. And I relate this to, so the Cartesian coordinate system. And then obviously we got to talk about John Dee, because in Enochian magic, there was certain furniture, certain tablets, right, used in a ceremonial setting in a room, in a certain setup. The table had to be a certain height off the ground, had to be on, each leg had to have its own sigil, et cetera, et cetera.
I think to a degree, it's just mental illness.
Well, you could argue that, but the Golden Dawn took that interpretation of Enochian magic, it even Crowley did, and they use these tablets, where I think that these tablets, again, was a physical medium for these entities, whatever is outside the fabric of reality, to come to fruition. So remember, I brought up the truncated pyramids, the tablets that they use. Well, this is a 3D medium. So taking this incorporeal being in the ether and letting it manifest into a physical medium, right? And that's why they say Enochian entities are super dangerous, and you shouldn't give them like a full 3D pyramid to inhabit, because then they'll bring forward the destruction of the, who knows, right?
So to make a little more clarification on terms, possibly the way I would understand that transmitting a being from ether to a physical vessel is simplified by saying that you're drawing it from the realm of potential. Something that's potentially there, you bring into existence in reality, from the potential to the reality. Yeah,
whatever the other side is. And that's why I termed it arquitectura imaginalis, this imaginal architecture, the mundus imaginalis, this imaginary world where it's not quite imaginary, but it's not quite real. It's like the in-between. And I think you're able to, scrying, they say, is one of the ways to access this. And I think that this is the sort of technology that they were using in these buildings, because you see it, right? So can you bring up my screen real quick so I can share the cube real quick? And I have a couple pictures just for reference. But at the end of the day, it's all about the cubic. It's all about the cube as the procreator of everything. Can you see my screen? There we go.
All right, you go over this for a bit, and then let's get Roman swinging at it too.
So we have here, you see the 16, the 32, 64. So this is just a cut up cube, and then they have the dice in here as well. And this is a guy, Cesariano, which was an architectural theorist, right? He was coming up with all these crazy ideas. And so what the cube represents is, to the Pythagoreans, numbers, and Marsilio Ficino talked about this, they could procreate with each other. And I have a whole other section on that, but what I believe was happening was how you're saying this music that's in frozen music, right? Well, I think that if the people who were initiated were able to quite literally see these what they call number forms. So I think of it as some sort of cancer growing. If you were able to train the mind's eye to see these things, I think that's what would bring forth the experiences. We talked about earlier about how we're in, how reality show, the people wouldn't act the way they acted if the computers weren't, if the cameras weren't there. Well, the same goes for when you step into a church. I don't know if you guys have ever been to church. I have. But when you step into a church, you're in a different mindset. You're acting differently. The church itself, because you've come to believe that it's this holy place where you're there to worship, has influenced the way you see and perceive things, and the way that you literally act while you're there. You act like a different person because you're tapping into this other state of consciousness, essentially, but it's brought forth by the building. Now take that and augment it and turn it up to 10 back then. That's why Fulcanelli talked about these cathedrals being alchemical picture books for the plebs, right? For the peasants. It was, hey, look at this. This is really broken down. And it was a story, but then you had the way that the light came into it and the way that they heard sounds in there, the reverberations and the frequencies. And I believe that they thought maybe, hey, there's a reason. Let me pull this one up right here.
I'm gonna just add in there that with practice and with a language that you can comprehend something through, like you're not going to perceive that which you have no language or whatever for, because that serves as an intellectual scaffolding to interface between mind and body where your senses are actually at, so that you can detect something that otherwise other people wouldn't detect. And for me, the example would be, since practicing tuning, I can detect the edge of somebody's auric field without necessarily seeing it with my eyes, but like I get a reaction in my body when I cross the threshold of their bubble space if I choose to be looking for it, and other things too like that. And that's a trained thing that I believe other people could develop. And if that's possible and I experientially know it, then being able to sense the arithmetic energy coming off of geometry and shape, to me, that seems plausible.
It's phenomenology.
Absolutely.
It's phenomenology where your experiences dictate your reality. And look that up. Phenomenology. It's a study where whatever you're experiencing, whether it's real to you or not, or if it really happened, how you said John Dee and Edward Kelly, mental illness. Well, to them, it was real. To them, that was their perceivable reality. They perceive these encounters with these otherworldly beings as real. We can't confirm
all the
that.
parameters that I was kind of joking about the mental illness, but a lot of occultists do get a bit autistic with all the things that they feel like need to be all right and set up. But all of those different pieces of the puzzle for ceremony serve as the language of you setting the intention for the parameters of what you want to talk to in terms of you speaking with the potential or the field.
So I brought this up. La Familia Sagrada. So this is in Barcelona. And this cathedral was never finished, right? And it was made by an Antoni Gaudi. And this guy was a really interesting character because I recently found out that, check the interior out. It's crazy the way that he laid this out. But essentially,
it looks like sound waves in 3D. The way that they would show up on a computer in 2D, but like made into 3D.
They are exactly. They are algorithms incarnated. This is what I believe that Pythagoras talked about, the music of the spheres, but only he could hear the music of the spheres. If you're able to calm the mind, quiet enough, you could hear this frequency that the planets put out. Johannes Kepler talked about these things. And I think that they took these concepts and quite literally built a building out of these things. And this is made in the proportion of man, right? So you can lay down a Vitruvian man here and he would fit perfectly. And it's got to do with the chakras and all these things, which I'm not 100% familiar with, but again, from what I've been reading. But this guy, Antoni Gaudi, he is up for priesthood because they believed that the miracles that were conducted within this
sainthood, maybe?
I'm sorry, sainthood. Yes, sainthood. The miracles that were conducted in this building were a product of the building. They attributed it to the actual building itself. They're like, this guy, right? He was very religious and he understood that everything. He lived in the basement of this cathedral and he wasn't surrounded by models of saints. No, he was surrounded by models of this thing. And those were his saints. That was his perfection. And if you look up the models, they are literally life-size models that he was standing next to. And they were huge models that he could walk into. But based off of that, he was able to, and it's still not finished. They're still working on it. But essentially, they attributed, again, theurgy, they attributed the miracles to the building itself. Like that is mind-blowing. It's like, what state of mind are you in when you're going into this building where you're able to literally make a biological change within your body to where you're able to trigger a miracle. There's something much more sophisticated at work. Or is it all mental, right? That's another hermetic. Is it truly all mental, or is it the building that's able to help you, put you, transport you when you go in through this door into this other dimension in order for you to be able to manifest things quicker? I 100%, I've always said, because I played guitar for my church for over 5 years, and I went around traveling to doing concerts and all this stuff. And I would see the way that these priests and these preachers would manipulate the crowd, right? They would talk, the way that they talk, the prestige that they put out was they were able to bend people. Dude, I remember when it was the guy praying for me, and he would put his hand, right, because I'm Pentecostal. He would put his hand on my head, and the whole thing of Pentecostal, they all faint, right? They all talk in tongues and they go crazy and all this stuff. But he would be pushing down on my head, and some people would fall down. And me, dude, I was pushing back until he finally gave up and he just moved on, because I wasn't falling for it, but other people were
falling for it. Well, like these cathedrals, in terms of the healing capacity, I believe that they serve similar to a tuning fork in that what the body is able to do with coherent vibration in the sound form is it auto-tunes itself. It basically, you see this with, I've talked about this before, but you see this with like nature all over the place, that nature, whenever there's coherence and dissonance next to each other, or like off rhythm next to on rhythm, the off rhythm will mirror the on rhythm over time. Like if you put a bunch of metronomes in the same room,
that's wild,
and you set them all off at different times, and you come back later, they'll all be going at the same tick.
So heartbeats will do the same, and women's moon cycles will also start to sync up on that same type of cycle. And it's interesting because, things work in cycles. Even though everything is reflective of the cube, you got the squaring of the circle, the formation of a cycle, putting that cycle in a grid and having it be traceable, because measurement itself was held sacred in ancient Sumeria, Mesopotamia, and ancient Egypt. To be able to measure something, to be able to actually go out and take real measurements and to put value to a measurement and to be able to size something was so important in higher civilization and evolution of civilization. To be able to take measurements and to be able to see it fruitfully do something, fit it into place perfectly through measurements, whatever that measurement may be, if it's even oral, if it's a literal, like a manifested measurement of an auric field, or if we were living at different times, with before we were dumbed down through years of bullshit, and our pineal glands were actually working at the true balanced state and optimized state that we could be, then potentially, like you were saying earlier about feeling the like mathematic effects, you could be actually literally seeing these different types of waves and rays. If you were to be able to have a heightened connection to the earth and be able to walk and see a place with electromagnetic hotspot that might literally have an underground cavern or a subterranean water well, people walking around with divining rods, they had a magnetism to their body that in tune worked with the divining rods, which is something that is really important when we talk about this, because you brought up, we brought up navigation, we brought up seafarers, we brought up coordinations, right? This is the foundation of architecture, the adept ability to be able to place the building here. Okay, yeah, you got to draw the building, you got to make the schematics, and you got to have the vision, and you got to sit with God and have your shamanic experiences through your whispering dreams at night into your body. But you also got to find the fucking place for it to go. And that is half of the battle, because we are building on top of the planet. We are in absolute cohesion with the planet. We are completely symbiotically intertwined into the body of the atmosphere. So we need its permission. And if we choose correctly with true intention and be able to manipulate whatever type of Schumann resonance or magnetic energies coming off of that, then we will in turn be able to heal ourselves. And that's where the symbiotic goodness and this higher echelon of religious understanding was with this, because you had to choose the place for it to go. The ground is sacred worship as you get on your knees and you go up and down, right? It's the earth that holds us still. And so we're able to encapsulate that energy through that. And it's very, very important. And so breathing, I was just going to bring it up, breathing, closing one nostril at a time, and equalizing your lungs and the hemispheres of your brain can allow us to tap back into nature a lot easier and calm ourselves down and be the true optimized humans that we can be, because our breath is the most in control thing that we have available to us, and it's free at cost, free entertainment for hours. You want to go fucking be entertained for hours, go into the forest, sit down and put your thumb on your nostril and fucking breathe, and you'll just be like blown away. You almost pass out. Your dog's over here running around sniffing up mushrooms and deer shit, and you're just like, I don't even care about anything right now. And then also got to grab a joint too.
Can you pull up my screen real quick, Chance? Because what you were saying, Romie, right? They broke everything down to the 4, representing the cube. 4 formation, it's the number of the demiurge. When you open up a cube, it forms a cross. They understood this, and that's why they were upset. The Pythagoreans were obsessed with the cube. And these are called tesserae, so tesseracts, right? And it would start with a point. So the number forms. The number 1 is a point, the number 2 is a line, number 3 is a plane, and then number 4, which is the cube, is a solid. And what you're saying, where you're able to quite literally see these forms, there's a name for that, and it's called synesthesia, where you're able, so the meaning is union of the senses. It's a perceptual phenomenon in which stimulation of one sensory or cognitive pathway leads to involuntary experiences in a second sensory or cognitive pathway. And what are number forms? A number form is a mental map, right? Which automatically and involuntarily appears whenever someone who experiences number forms thinks of numbers. So a synesthesia is when you think of a number 1 and you associate it with the color purple or the color blue, right? That's one of the more common forms of synesthesia. There's also ideasthesia, which is a psychological phenomenon which activations of concept evoke perception-like sensory experiences. Okay, so this is what I was saying, because as I was reading Pythagorean palaces, and you can take the picture down, Chance. As I was reading Pythagorean palaces, it would talk about, right, the Rosicrucians talked about the invisible college. What if this invisible college is exactly what we're talking about? Maybe perhaps it is invisible, or how Tracy Twyman talked about the hidden hyperspace kingdom, or in Atlas Shrugged, the valley, Galt, whatever it was, Galt Valley or something like that, where it's a place. But is it truly a place, or is it a state of mind, or is it a state of consciousness? But this is an actual phenomenon that is involuntary and automatic, where people are able to quite literally see number forms. And when you go to Marsilio Ficino, he talked about how numbers procreate with each other and keep building on top of one another. So again, I think of it as like some cancerous mass that keeps building. And who knows if you're able to either train or be initiated into these arts where you're able to quite literally see these number forms in these buildings or wherever, in order to evoke a phenomenon, again, a phenomenology where the experience is real to you. It doesn't matter if I can't see the angels, John D. No. You can, so it's real to you. You know, even if you're schizophrenic, whatever, but still, this idea is just that. So I'm going to read a quote real quick. This is just what human thought is doing all the time. The human mind builds architectural forms dependent and determined by the nature of thought. Man is an architect in the invisible as well as the visible world. He builds with his mind in the super substance of thought subconsciously, as well as consciously in stone. No doubt his visible architecture is a replica of the invisible thought forms, which he is all the time building in his aura and objectifying for clairvoyance to observe. When he erects a building in stone and ornaments it, he is simply objectifying the state of his own mind and emotions, and those of the community or period in which he lives. Styles of architecture thus reproduce community outlook. And
yeah, dog. So what I think is up is I've been thinking this for a while, that I think the astral realm that people sometimes visit is maybe the original metaverse. That the astral realm is like the exact same as the metaverse, but in the psyche, in psychic space, in the psychic internet of interconnection.
The Akashic records.
And that's
like
what,
language,
that's what the
language, mythology, symbolism.
That's
yeah,
what
exactly.
they were tapping into.
Right, right. There's a technology to tap into that astral metaverse, but my reason for likening it to the metaverse is because I think that it may be artificial, like that our language and our mythology actually built this overlay as a type of information highway. Yeah,
like an egregore. Whoa, trip out.
Like an egregore metaverse. Yeah, I
Pull
think
up this
that's
picture, Chance, because I know Romie's gonna dig this.
Could be.
This
That's
is
tight.
What I think the type of places they were using for this type of thing. And speaking of the metaverse, I am part of a VR mystery school, and they have at the very end of this mystery. don't fucking laugh, bro. So check this out. So, so check this out. It's an entire building modeled after the Tree of Life. And at the very end, they have a Golden Dawn, because the founders Golden Dawn, part of Golden Dawn, and they have a Golden Dawn temple, and they have a room where you're able to step into it.
Wait, in the VR?
In VR, bro. There's they have the
so this is what I mean. I think I think initiates of the past and probably some of the present have these VR temples and structures, but in the astral, where some of the coordination that occurs worldwide between these groups that seem like they're not connected may be happening on this astral psyche level, where they're like actually going to meetings. Because I tell this story a lot, but I once met a guy who said that while he was on LSD, he met somebody in the astral realm and sat down and had a conversation with them psychically and determined that they were going to meet somewhere in the physical world. And he went to that place at the time, and the fucking guy was there.
Oh, it's the OG Matrix. It's when he's eating the steak, ignorance is bliss. You know, it's like, I know this steak is fake, but I'm still going to eat it because it tastes good. But I 100%, I've talked to people too, bro, who say that they've been into the astral realm and they've seen dinosaurs, they've seen Bigfoot, they've seen guards of political figures in these astral realms because they're susceptible to attacks in this other realm. This, again, that's why it's the mundus imaginalis, where it's this higher state of being where you're able to enter, and it's the consciousness just pouring out just a bunch of shit. But I think that right, this is the tomb of Rosenkreutz. You're able to see here.
Hold on. No, keep going. But also, really quick, just want to sidebar. I'm zooming in here on these names on the very bottom, and I see DEIMOLA.
Well, this is based off the sigil of Amet, which is something that not John Dee didn't come up with it, but the angels fixed this version. I think this is the John Dee version, but John Dee had a version before that was fixed by the angels. But that's the whole thing with the Rosicrucians, where they say that John Dee was one of the first ones to ever come up with it. So they were using a lot of his things. But I think
potentially Enochian.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that these are mandalas, right? And I think this is the OG metaverse, where they're able to focus on these sigils essentially and transport themselves to wherever they desired. And through the use of light and geometry, because these are geometric forms, and essentially optics. Numbers, optics. Look at
their tools. Look at their fucking magic chest of optic tools.
It's a ball of
scrying mirrors, telescope.
What the hell is it called? God damn, bro. I'm drawing a blank
Crystal
right now.
ball?
A crystal ball. Holy shit.
Jesus,
a
man.
crystal ball. You have.
You can't even remember crystal ball, but you know all this other shit.
Wait, look at the 3-eyed glasses, bro. That's for your 1, 2, third eye to look through.
I'm telling you, they were. Look at this. Look at this place. Look, you have the dome. The light would come in, and you would go in there, and you would transfer. This is sacred geometry. Look, this is the flower of life. Which, remember what that lady told us on that podcast, where she said the flower of life was like some sort of portal, right?
So for people that don't know, this is the tomb of Rosenkreutz, like the OG father of the Rosicrucian order, like Christian Rosenkreutz. Just because we didn't actually say that, just wanted.
Yeah,
to
I said the tomb of Christian Rosenkreutz. I said at the beginning.
You did say that? Oh,
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
sorry, I
so-
didn't hear.
So this is a little model, which I actually might pick this up. This is pretty dope. But so
Yeah,
I
sick.
think that architecture like this this is a building being used as some sort of talisman, as some sort of mandala, where they were able to again transport to a different dimension. And I love what you said, Chance, how it is the OG metaverse. And I do believe that if you're initiated into all these mysteries, the Eleusinian mysteries, what was all that about? Well, maybe perhaps taking a fuckload of psychedelics and tripping your ass off into another dimension inside some temple, and then the freaking statues would come to life, and you'd be like, oh my, we're in Olympus.
Yeah,
This
I've
building
been
is Olympus.
when I used to do psilocybin, I stopped because I kept getting freaked out by interacting with people that were around me that nobody else could see, and it was troubling.
I saw Baphomet, bro. I know exactly how you feel, and I did it.
I don't mean like hallucinatory. I mean like they looked exactly like the people around me. They were just as solid. They could touch me. It was too much. It was too much.
Wow. So, well, I'll save it for the second hour, but yeah, this is again, man is thus a creator and architect on a small scale as God is the great architect of the universe. Man in the image of God mentally creates forms which duplicate the greater force forms of the universe at large. And that's Fears Moorish. And we'll get into that in the second hour because I want to bring out the esoteric gushy goodness. Ugh.
Well, let's we don't have to rush to fit it in, but as we wrap up the first half here, go ahead and talk about some of. Yeah, we need to get some Roman slides up in. We can go longer if you guys can go longer than 2 hours, and we make the first hour a bit longer. I'm good.
I'm good. I mean, you can go, Romie.
Oh my God.
I talked about because I want to respect that I've been on another show, and in the second hour was what I'm going to talk about. I don't want to put it, on the first hour visible here, the exoteric, and then they'll have it, it's like, why the fuck did I do that show? You know what I mean? I want to keep it on the second hour for myself.
I think 2.5 hours is perfect for me with the.
Let's do that. Let's shoot for that. I
do have
give us some rundown so we have a closer balance of Romie to Juan in the first hour here.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of, and Juan's going to riff off of the stuff here too. We're going to talk about Vitruvius. Like it is more of like, I guess what you might consider exoteric, just some of these more famous architects for people before we close out and then pop over to the second hour. But that being said, I found a slide. I made a slide real quick while you guys are talking about the alternate nostril breathing. Nadi Shodhana Pranayama. It is amazing, guys. And so if I didn't make it clear enough, you close one of your noses and then you breathe.
I'd suck in a booger and probably leave one, like get one out too if I was to do that, bro. Like
exactly. It's perfect clearing. It's perfect clearing. Just saying, hey, I just wanted to show you guys physically what it is. And I swear to God, it is the best thing before bed. If you do 5 of these right before you're lying in bed. Yep.
Do it at home, kids.
All right, Romie, continue. We're not going to be doing this.
That's some good. No, that's perfect podcasting audio. Is just the sound of our nostrils.
ASMR.
Keep it going. Yeah. Somebody out there really likes it.
Oh God, that's good. Okay, so Vitruvius. People
you spelled
know
it wrong, bro.
Vitruvius. I know it's fine.
Vitruvius.
This is one Juan wanted me to pull this slide up. When we actually sat down one night, we're going to make a slideshow together, but then we ended up talking about a bunch of other shit for 2 hours. So
always happens.
We got 2 slides in there. It does. But you can see that this is the classic Vitruvian man that people know from Da Vinci, right? And
it's Cesariano. That's Cesariano, and then I have the 3 different versions too. I was going to say that for later.
Then. Oh, you were going to. Oh shit, my bad. Well, the Vitruvian man. Vitruvian man. Vitruvius himself. He wrote the most influential book on architecture known to man. It's called the 10 Books of Architecture. And he basically kind of was the forefather of like masonry and higher echelons of architecture. And so to be honest, I mean, it's all kind of ripped off of what I consider to be more sacred architecture, which would be the Eastern architecture. I think that Indian architecture is more sacred than the Western architecture, and especially the Renaissance architecture. I think that the true magic has always been known in the Far East, or in the East in general, especially in the Vedas. That's just how I believe. I love the Vedas. I love Vedic history.
I think that they're from a similar source, but the older ones are closer to the source.
Yeah, exactly. But the thing is the source itself had been contorted. Once the magic was found out and hijacked and taken to the West, then it was used for more forces.
Let's just say it how it is. You mean when the Vatican happened?
When the Vatican happened, so the bells, you can look at the symbolism of the bells. The bells is a huge thing. We brought it up earlier with the dresses, okay? And now we don't want to get too deep into this because this is some real juicy shit. But that shape is one of the most sacred shapes that's ever existed and ever will. It is potentially, that's why they always say the moon rang like a bell, the earth rings like a bell. These rocks, they're hollow, they ring like a bell. It has a specific toroidal and cymatic significance that might be like electrogravitics, like something defying the laws of physics. CSE, I don't know necessarily. But,
the Nazi bell.
The Nazi bell
technology.
Yes. And so, into the occult they were. This is more Western architecture, but it's fascinating, right? To think that every detail of these buildings held so much significance and function. Feng shui, function. And to dive a bit deeper into the trainings of the antiquated architects here. This is from Vitruvius himself. Consequently, since this study is so vast in extent, embellished and enriched as it is with many different kinds of learning, I think that men have no right to profess themselves architects hastily, without having climbed from boyhood the steps of these studies, and thus nursed by the knowledge of many arts and sciences, having reached the heights of the holy ground of architecture. So this kind of brings me to that point we made very early on, and we'll close it out after these couple next slides, and you guys can riff on all the things. This is Ezekiel, the original OG, okay? Vitruvius is the OG of Greek architecture, and that of the Western world. But Ezekiel, who corresponds to someone else in the Vedas, I can't remember, but he was given these prophecies from God. And the Ezekiel wheel is incredibly significant, as is the original Temple of Solomon. And this just is to highlight the divine significance of the angles. And the angles are the angels, because the angels, or the divine forces, are the ones that took Ezekiel, brought them on, their cloud up to the heavens, whatever that may be, if it's an Akashic source, right? And given him downloads of information, the angles of the building, these specific proportions. to reach a higher dimensional frequency here on this specific physical plane. You can step in, 1 second, be outside on the grass, vibing out, doing your thing. The next second, step into this building and these sacred geometrical functions and have a ascensional experience. And, the wheel itself is esoteric and symbolic of so many things. I mean, this is Ezekiel's wheel. It rotated and moved on all directions. It was ever moving. It's a primordial ball. And that itself is a sphere of.
If you look at this cherubim and this wheel, and then the Father above, this is also encoding the triune nature of the sun. You have the creator above in this triangle. You have the wheel, which is the destroyer. Actually, it's chaos. It's the feminine. It's the yoni. It's the one and yoni are philologically the own e, the one, and then you have the child, the preserver, the savior, the cherubim baby there.
I wish this
Ezekiel's
was better quality
wild.
so we can actually zoom in on these.
To add real
People
quick,
can look that up on their own.
Yeah.
Ezekiel's vision.
to add on to what you've been saying, Romie, the Vitruvius was actually inspired by Daddy Pythagoras. So all of his ideals came from, again, the source. That's why the Pythagoreans are so important, because they stepped it up, right? They personified. They're essentially archetypes, right? These numbers.
Yes.
Number 1 is the monad. It's the thought of God. Number 2 is the duad, the duality, the yin and yang. Number 3, the triad, which we're seeing right here. The Trinity, the Holy Trinity, the Hindu preserver, destroyer, and creator, right? So we see this all throughout history. But what I love about it is that Vitruvius took those ideas, those Pythagorean principles, and put it in his work of that quite literally revolutionized architecture. And Cesariano was the one that translated Vitruvius's work into Italian for the first time. So that's the role that he plays, and he drew his own guy, and then he drew the erect Vitruvian man because it's symbolic of the procreation of number with one another, where they're constantly creating, 2 + 2 = 4. And there's certain ways to be able to give a number a gender, and it gets really convoluted, but essentially they show the Vitruvian man in orgasm because he's creating the world in real time, right? And he is within a square, right? The formation, the cube, and the circle, right? So this idea is, again, it can get very sexual in some parts because that's just the way they were, but it all goes back down to Pythagoras for some reason. And I want to point out
the phallus, man.
The god is adored in all temples with cubic solidity, and then the cube having 6 faces, 8 vertices, and 12 edges represents the harmonic ratio 6, 8, 12, and was called geometric harmony, and was revered by Pythagoreans as the perfect figure. And it goes from the cube to number forms, to the perfect figure man, to linea colte, to corpo trasparente. So this is the formation of the homunculus, if you will, of the ideas of back then, of how they were able to infuse these geometrical proportions into the architecture and make it resonate back into reality some way or another. And I think that the ley lines have to do with that. That's why in a lot of grimoires, for example, the magic of Abramelin, you have to have a certain house facing a certain way with a certain number of windows. And who talked about spaces and the effect that they had on people? Vitruvius did. He talked about how you couldn't have a certain room a certain way because the feng shui, it would mess with the energies and make people feel a certain way. So I believe that how the enchantment has been lost in architecture. I believe that these cookie cutter communities, which I live in one, are just that. They are literally just printing these houses one by one by one, and the magic has been lost, and our own homes are sucking us dry of our energy sometimes, and that's
the
why
angles of sorrow. Yeah,
exactly. We're literally absorbing it all the time. Plus all the 5G frequencies, the Wi-Fi, the water in the city is horrible. Like all these things.
we all know that. We know all that stuff.
Come on, bro. You know what I mean? But you get what I'm saying though. Like they take it. I think that's by design, because let's be honest. Our educational system doesn't teach us about these things. It doesn't teach us about this. And our educational system is a Rockefeller byproduct. It's meant to enslave. It's meant to not disinform, but just give you enough so you can get by for whatever bullshit reason and be in debt for the rest of your life. And that's it, right? They don't teach us what these numbers meant. They don't teach us what the ancients were talking about. Like, hey, the number 1 or the number 10.
Thinking about like the 6, 8, and the 12. This is like all even numbers, and numbers that are more associated with like etherical type of like sacred geometry, or specific toroidal significance. But like odd numbers like 5 and 7 are like more almost I don't know if primordial is the right word, or like
no, they're literally prime numbers.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, interesting. So I was wondering about that because, like, I'm like, well, all numbers have significance, right? The Pythagorean goodness, but, like you bring up the 6, 8, and the 12, but where's the odd numbers? And so is it divided almost like the odd numbers are more kind of derivative towards like man magic and like physical here-ness, and then because 3, 6, 9 was the Tesla numbers. He said study 3, 6, and 9, and you'll unlock the mysteries of the universe for free energy kind of situation. So I was just tripping out on that thing because you're the Pythagorean guy. What's up with the odds and the evens?
So the odds and the evens, I'm sure I've read somewhere about it, but I want to read this real quick. In Ficino's version of figured numbers, which is a Pythagorean concept, numbers are given a lot of power since every number corresponds with a geometric form, how you were saying. A form does and is everything that a number does and is. So to the Pythagoreans, anything above 10 was just reduced back down to a single digit. So if it was, for example, 13, either 1 plus 4 or 1 plus 3 equals 4 or 1 minus 3 equals 2. So it always goes back to the 1 through 10. So if you have 222, it's 6. 2 plus 2 plus 2 is 6. And that's how they were able to break down. But yes, there was, and I didn't talk about it in our Pythagorean symbolism. Or maybe I did, the episode that we did that forever ago, where certain numbers, the odds and the evens they do play a role. I'm not remembering what role that was, but yes, there is something to do with the odd and even.
I could see it be kind of like the yang, yin, feminine, masculine, just archetypal type of structure, some sort of Vesica Pisces thing. Yeah, I mean, it's so crazy. Are we switching over? Are we doing that?
Yeah, I think we should maybe start plugging our stuff for you guys and then switch over.
Because I want to keep going, but like we're going to be on a fucking roll. We want to actually make this like it will never stop.
And I'm sitting on all this stuff about Pythagoras that I want to lay on Juan.
Oh,
so we'll get to that in the second hour. But I want to make a case. I'll try not to be too verby about it. But in the second hour, I want to make a case for Pythagoras basically being like Jesus of an earlier time in terms of being an allegorical character, or like more akin to the Mercury Hermes version of Jesus. But we'll get to that. And give us, tell us about what's new on the One-on-One podcast and what you've got going on besides podcasts, and plug your stuff, what you're excited about. And then we need Roman to do the same thing.
So the One-on-One podcast.com, at the One-on-One podcast on almost all social media platforms. I started a new show with a local Florida man, Old World Florida. We're going to be doing documentaries. We're going to be doing occulted Florida history, and we're going to be talking about these places, but actually going to these places and documenting them and making videos and, recording. It's going to be commentary in real time. So I'm working on that. It's called what the fuck did we name the show? I forgot what we named the show. I'll have to look the name up, but we made a show. We're going to be recording very soon and putting out episodes. And then I also have my first, I called it a zine, but I think it's a little bit more serious than a zine, the Occultus Mundi, the Hidden World. And this is the first issue, the October 2022 issue. And it is 24 pages of packed goodness, esoteric goodness. We have the homunculus, Aristotelian biology, cryptic and cipheric organization of the modern alphabet, that's by our homosexual alchemist, Barley Stone, Adrenochrome Unveiled, Biblio Man C, Possessed by Slick Dissident. And these are our contributors. You can find us there. And
I'm pretty upset that I wasn't invited to write an article. What the fuck?
Everybody's always upset.
Damn.
But the problem
dude, I'm good at writing. I was an English major. I study this stuff. Give me a break, dude.
The problem was, dude,
it's too late. You can't make it. You don't need no excuses. Just keep giving your.
What about volume 2? I
want you to know I'm butthurt though.
Oh no, that's what I'm saying. This is a collaborative effort, and I wanted to first put it out to see. First of all, I had never designed a booklet before, so this is the first homunculus, and see how it was. And yeah, from here on out, I have my information on there. If anybody wants to submit questions or an article, you can send it to me on the one podcast at gmail.com.
And so how do I get a copy? What's the best way for people to get a copy? Where's that being sold?
On my website, you can go, there's a link there. It'll send you to the Ko-Fi. You can pick up a copy. And yeah, it's going to be, hopefully, it brings, I want to keep these esoteric subjects alive, and not just, I don't consider it a zine after the fact, because it is it's educational. I mean, this is real knowledge. This is real shit, right? This is real stuff. And I think that a lot of zines get lost with the aesthetic and all this stuff. I didn't want that. I wanted straight to the point, occult or esoteric subjects.
It's like those old Masonic journals that would circulate around.
Yes.
Tight,
like the all-seeing eye.
And so, and by
really
having it be a public thing, for the most part, then it allows the audience to grow itself organically and naturally. So say you write an article in there, you submit it, you get it going good. You're on the next volume. Okay, sweet. Here's your link. Cause we're printing them out ourselves, putting them in.
I got people hitting me up, bro. I got people hitting me up, like wanting to, like, that I don't even know. Like, I don't even know who they are. Like, I was like, dude, we're not paying anybody. It's zero budget. So
back in the day though, dude, this is how people would like wind up writing a book. They would write these type of articles for these journals and for their clubs and societies. Together, yeah. And then eventually they're like, wow, I actually have enough to start kind of throwing a book together, and all the names of all those contributors. I'd love to see this thing keep rolling, and maybe some longer form come out of the brain droppings from their writings to that journal. This is cool, man. Maybe just call it like a journal.
Yeah, well, yeah, I think I'm gonna
prestigious.
Dub it a esoteric journal, like definitely dubbed off of the all-seeing eye, right? Manly Penis Hall, Daddy Hall, and I wanted to do something, a different sort of medium, because nobody's doing this in the game. You know what I mean? Like, this is different, and I just want to bring.
There's probably somebody.
But that we know of, who's doing? Nobody's doing a journal.
I know everybody in the
dude,
world.
Juan's doing all kinds of shit nobody's doing.
Ain't nobody.
Let me get my comic real quick. Hold on.
It's true facts, though. It's true facts. He really is.
Oh no, absolutely. All
right, Juan, go get your other thing. Give us your plugs, Romie.
Okay, so we do have a new show, Esoteric America, with Mark from My Family Thinks I'm Crazy, and this is also, and Chad Stumke. Author, researcher, amazing fucking person. If you had Chad on your show, Chance, oh man,
I'm the only Chad around here. You get Chad. I don't know Chad yet. I need to get introduced.
He's super cool. I heard him originally on Higher Side Chats a couple years ago, and he does the esoteric layout of Detroit. And it blew my mind. It really started actually opening up the floodgate to what we did on Rising from the Ashes as Esoteric America months, syncretism months and everything, the Michael Wan stuff and all that.
Sorry, I'm getting my camera to focus.
Oh, shit. I was like, okay, I'm stopping. And so basically Esoteric America, if you guys can go on YouTube and check out the episodes. awesome, amazing individuals that live anywhere in the States that want to look up the history and mysterious history of their town and create a little slideshow and come on the show and talk about it. Because we're going to create an entire map across the country, having all these people talk about their towns, and we can all connect. It's a cool community thing. And man, we've already had, I think, 7 people just who've never been on podcast before. They've never been on podcast. And they
crush it.
And they crush it. And the people fucking love it. And so it's a strictly YouTube Rockfin show. There's that. And of course, you guys know Rising from the Ashes. And
dude, that's not true. I heard Esoteric America on my RSS feed as a podcast.
Oh, it is. No, it's straight up a real podcast as well.
Fucking
actually.
Fake news, bro.
Hey, man, you can fake news on these nights, eh? But listen up, though. For real, everybody, I want to throw out one final plug. All right. This one's from the bottom of my heart. Okay. There are very, 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 very many sacred types of breathing, but you have the 3-part breath, the alternate nostril breathing, the cooling breath, the ocean breath, the humming bee breath, the bellows breath, and against the wave breath. Okay. Look these up. Start breathing so hard that you freak your fucking neighbors out. Start breathing so consciously in the grocery store that people think you're having something wrong with you. Breathe so hard that your consciousness shifts and drifts into a new millennia. Okay. Time travel and split the physics in its damn spine. Get your caduceus going, baby. Double kundalini all the way up. We all deserve protruding pineal glands to see through the voids. And the only way to do that is by connecting with our breaths. Okay. So do that. You're welcome.
I had Gordy on, bro, and he was doing the Mongolian throat singing. He did it on air. And he says that he does that to get into like this meditative state. And I'm like, dude, that's so awesome because you're reverberating with nature, right? Like you get into this state where you're like, you start making all these noises.
Yeah. Dude, you can heal yourself. You can heal.
Yeah, dude.
I've done it. I combine it with forks. I've like used the fork to help me get my voice to good pitches, but there it is, man.
What?
The chosen one.
So finally, well, it's not out. The Kickstarters just got theirs. So I'll be listing this on my website probably next week to start shipping out. But yes, finally, after many delays from the shippers and all this stuff, and they had a paper shortage. Can you believe that there was a paper shortage, so they couldn't print our comic book? But we have here the Chosen One versus the Saturnian Cube comic book, and there is me fucking around with an occulted relic that was transported into this dimension. I can't give off too much, but here's Mark lighting a blunt with his superpowers.
I can't wait, man. I'm pretty sure it's in my mailbox just waiting for me to go get it.
Yeah, check that out. It'll be on my website. And then we have here, grow your own homunculus, an inflatable Moloch if you want to order one of those. The Occult Book Club, check that out. Magic bullets, so good they'll really turn heads. So we have here different ads. But yeah, it's freaking awesome. And I'll be shipping these out from my website. You can get that on there once I list it on there. And also the Occultus Mundi, the hidden world. So putting out stuff into the ether and into manifestation, art. And I think that art feels synchronicity. So I've been synchronistically charged ever since, and it feels really good. So I'm gonna start breathing really fucking hard and Mongolian throat singing while I'm shopping at Publix or something. What the fuck is up with this guy?
Like, sorry, I'm just trying to emanate my VW bug. No,
Yeah,
but the singing and chanting also ties into what?
Higher rituals of magic. Yep.
Exactly, in the architecture. So that's what you guys are going to check out in the second hour. So y'all better know what's good and get this rest of the. You guys better go over Rockfin. You feel me?
Guys, it's been a blast. I know we're going to just really crush the second hour. So thanks for being here. And everybody, make sure you hit up Rising from the Ashes for more Romie one-on-one podcasts, the one-on-one podcast for more of our homuncologists.
I'm going to get naked in the second hour. Is that all right?
Whatever you got to do is, just keep the below the waist off camera and I'm fine with it.
All right, bro. Awesome.
All right, guys, we'll see you on the other side.
The phallus.
right, friends. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. I hope you had a good time. It's always a hoot and a holler with Juan and Romie. You know, it's like way more fun to do podcasts with your friends. You can't always pick the same people, but in terms of like laughs, this one's up there. But the gravy was thick. Now, I'm going to be a bit brief with the outro here. It was already a humongous episode. I just wanted to make sure you guys knew the rundown of what was in the extended hour and a half. So this was a huge one, 3 hours total in terms of the interview in the two segments. And I do hope you guys are interested in signing up for the extended content if you're not already a member. Huge thanks to everybody who already is. But really think about like the reciprocity here. I'm not trying to like put you on a guilt trip if you're not a supporter. It's fine if you just listen to the free stuff. But in the last 7 days, I will have put out like, I don't know, 10 plus hours of free content. And I'm only asking for reciprocity to unlock this last little bit, like an hour and a half, which is a lot. We get into so much. So I hope you guys will consider. It's really great to have that energetic channel of like, you support me, I support you with the podcast that you love, and it's awesome. So you can do that on Rockfin or Patreon. You can find the links to both of those in the show notes. Patreon's $5 a month. You get everything I've ever put on Patreon, including an RSS feed for an audio-only version of the show that you can plug into your favorite podcast player. And for the Rockfin side, you get to unlock everybody's premium content on the whole network, including our homie Juan. The One-on-One podcast has some Rockfin exclusive content as well, I'm sure. So what did we talk about in the Plus extension? I got into some discussion about the allegory of Pythagoras, like who he is in terms of mythologically speaking, astrotheologically speaking. We discussed the body as a temple, that creation of a fractal. You know, the body is the temple and the temple as a body. We discussed localized surface plasmon resonance with the artifact known as the Lycurgus cup, which demonstrates that nanoparticles were a technology that the ancients were aware of and utilizing. Fascinating. And then we talked about the musical fifth and architectural consciousness enhancing sigils built into stone. And this is really cool. I'm going to touch on that again in a second. And Juan walked us through the concept of the chapel perilous and the mundus imaginalis. Then we discussed technology of scrying and how that may be related to architectural enlightenment enhancement technologies. We discussed entity summoning rituals that utilize the human aura as a portal. Ooh. Then the Apotheosis of George Washington. Have you heard of that? We looked at this incredible fresco at the United States Capitol building rotunda. It's humongous, which demonstrates the entire theory that astrotheology is applied to historical characters to deify them, and that probably demonstrates that our history is not necessarily trustworthy as accurate real life, what happened, and more along the lines of a mythology portraying history. Then Roman talked about invisibility cloaking technology. Very fascinating stuff. And that's just like a teaser. In an hour and a half, of course, we talked about way more than that. I just wanted to give you a little bit of a rundown of what's there. And I'm excited about doing this conversation about architecture, which has been called frozen music, because the next InnerVerse episode, get your biscuits ready, is going to be about the structure of music in the occult sense, applying it to astrology, looking at the chromatic scale as possibly a transhumanism thing, like in a bad way. Not necessarily the chromatic scale itself, but like the way it's been utilized in modern music, possibly being stepping stones towards the removal of the Trinity and the creation of like the roboticized man. Fascinating stuff. If you would like more preview of this music talk, go over to George Mesa's channel called Third Eye Edify. And he's done an awesome video on 440. It's called like 440 Hertz, like HURTS, where he gives a preview of what he's discussing in the recording we already did for InnerVerse, which will be coming out next week. So I hope you do check all that stuff out. And I would love to catch up with people at Music and Sky Festival coming up on October 13th. It's 2 weeks away. I couldn't be more excited. We're going to have such a good time down in Southern California, the Cuyama Valley, this huge festival being, I mean, not huge like in terms of size, but huge in terms of energy. This amazing festival being thrown by Mike Winter of Alpha Vedic. Going to be a lot of great people there, and including like many of your teachers and heroes of the podcasting world of alternative science and health. Yeah, I'm so excited. So I'd love to see you there. One of my recent clients from Florida who did a sound healing with me said he's going to be traveling all the way there. So like, if he can come from Florida, what's your excuse? I'm making a pretty big journey myself to come from Missouri all the way out there. Now I'm going to play us out with a track by the homie Romie. I made up a title for it. It didn't really have a title, but he makes music all the time, which is super admirable. And in fact, I admire that about both Ron and Yomi. Juan and Roman are both extremely creative people who make all kinds of stuff outside of just podcasts. And I really admire that. And I strive to do the same and keep a lot of other projects flowing besides just this main thing. And yeah, for sure, make sure you're checking out the One-on-One podcast and Rising from the Ashes, both of their podcasts, so that you can get more of their awesome vibes. And I appreciate them so much as bros and friends and colleagues in this strange conspiratorial spiritual podcasting realm that we find ourselves in. And I appreciate you for tuning in. And I had to cut the intro short. I need to get this thing cranking in terms of production, but it was already a long episode, so I'm sure you get it. Love you so much. Thanks for tuning in. Enjoy the outro music, and I will see you on the next episode. Definitely check out Third Eye Edify on YouTube and that 440 Hertz episode if you want to warm up your earballs for the ideas that we're going to be presenting next time about music. And I will catch you guys on the flip. Much love. Bye-bye.